Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Lion of Round Top, the life and military service of Brigadier General Strong Vincent in the American Civil War, by H.G. Myers. Foreword by Dr. Frank P. Varney. Narrated by Al Kessel. Foreword. This book is going to be controversial, and that's a good thing. The past is not a fixed point. It keeps changing. Or, more accurately, what happened remains the same, but our understanding of it, that thing we call history, keeps changing. At least it should. The book you hold is going to make you reconsider something you were pretty sure was true. And that is where the good part of it comes in. Consider how many times you have been surprised to learn that something you viewed as fixed and permanent turned out not to be either of those things. That boss you thought was fair turns out not to be. That person you thought was honest turns out to be a fraud. That team you were sure was destined to lose wins it all. No matter how sure you are about something, there is always a chance that you were wrong. And so it is with history. We think we understand it, but sometimes what we think we know turns out to be wrong. History is written by people, and even with the best of intentions, people make mistakes. We assume that we can trust eyewitness accounts, though police officers will tell you that eyewitnesses are notoriously unreliable. In my research methods class, I used to give students multiple eyewitness accounts of famous historical events, like the Boston Massacre or the Battle of the Alamo, and then ask them to explain what happened. They were shocked to discover how often witnesses contradicted one another, or even contradicted themselves when the same witness gave different accounts to different people at different times. Stories change and grow as witnesses change or add things based on what they have heard other people say, or what their memory incorporates into the story. We do not always remember what happened. What we remember becomes what happened. We need to bear in mind that almost everyone wants other people to think well of them. There is always that temptation to make yourself the hero, to emphasize your role even at the expense of someone else, to make your friends look better and your rivals look worse, or perhaps the witness just got it wrong. Maybe there is no malice intended at all, only an honest mistake, nothing more sinister than the desire to appear admirable. And over time, you may even come to believe the story yourself. And if you become important, a leading general, a decorated hero, a president, a governor, an important writer, then your story becomes important to you, because it may be the foundation of your fame. And that fame, in turn, enables you to propagate the myth. However, there are usually other witnesses to these momentous events, and they may disagree with what we have come to believe. If they are not leading generals, however, or decorated heroes, or presidents, or governors, or important writers, then their stories may not get as much attention. They may tell that story over and over at reunions, and meetings, in speeches and in articles, in journals, and in newspapers. But these are not important people, so their story does not get as much attention. They were witnesses, though, and their stories should matter too. And in this book, they do. We think we know a lot about the American Civil War. We know who the heroes were and the villains. We know what happened at significant places on important days. We know this because it is the story we grew up with, the story we have heard over and over. We have seen the history books, although they may in fact be simply repeating the same old stories over and over, with no real attempt to find out if they are true. We have read novels and seen films that reinforce our acceptance of the legend, without questioning what those novels and films are based on. We do not ask whether they are in fact the truth, or simply the same old story told in the same old way. And there is a reluctance to abandon heroes, even if it only means replacing them with new heroes. That is why this book will be controversial. What happened on July 2nd, 1863, on a hill we call Little Round Top in a town named Gettysburg, is one of the most repeated stories of the Civil War, a shining moment in the greatest battle in that greatest of American conflicts. It features intense drama, taut action, suspense, tragedy, triumph, and heroism. In this book, Hans Guthrie Myers will show you that some of what you thought you knew about that day and that place is wrong. He will not significantly diminish the luster of heroes, but he will add a new one to the pantheon. Even so, it will change the narrative. Be open to new consideration of what you thought you knew. This is how we learn the truth. This is how history gets written. Dr. Frank P. Varney, author of General Grant and the Rewriting of History, How the Destruction of William S. Rosecrans Influenced Our Understanding of the Civil War, and General Grant and the Verdict of History, Memoir, Memory, and the Civil War. A note on the text. I have chosen to employ the name Federal as opposed to Union to refer to troops of the United States Army for the purposes of delineation between the war aim of the preservation of the Union and the armies of the United States government. For each chapter of this work, I have chosen an epigraph, lyrics from songs contemporaneous to the era and applicable to the subject matter of the various chapters, exempting the introduction and the appendix, in the name of thematic consistency, and to provide listeners with a taste of the culture of the nation as directly related to the ongoing Civil War. In the Army of the Union, if they post us in the van, we'll clear the way before, if the bravest soldiers can. We will drive the rebel forces from their strongholds to the sea, and live and die together in the Army of the Free. The Army of the Free, the Army of the Free. We will live and die together in the Army of the Free. We may rust beneath inaction, we may sink beneath disease, the summer sun may scorch us, or the winter's blasts may freeze, but whatever may befall us, we will let the rebels see that unconquered we shall still remain the Army of the Free. We are proud of our division, mid 500,000 souls, and only resting on our arms till the war cry onward rolls. When our gallant General Porter calls, why ready we shall be, to follow him forever with the Army of the Free. Though we live in winter quarters now, we're waiting but the hour, when Porter's brave division shall go forth in all its power, and when on the field of battle fighting we shall be, we'll swear that no disgrace shall stain the Army of the Free. Then hurrah for our division, may it soon be called to go, to strengthen our bravest brothers who have marched to meet the foe. God bless it, for we know right well, wherever it may be, 'twill try to add new luster to the Army of the Free. Porter's Division Song, The Army of the Free, Frank H. Norton, circa 1862. Introduction. The Vanishing of Vincent. If I can show that the retention by the Union Army of this key to the battlefield on July 2nd, 1863, is due to Strong Vincent and his gallant brigade, aided at the supreme moment by O'Rourke and his regiment, I shall feel that Vincent, O'Rourke, and the men of their commands who gave up their lives in that supreme effort did not die in vain. First Lieutenant Oliver Wilcox Norton, 83rd Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. It is a story everyone knows, or thinks they know. Under the sweltering heat of a summer sun in 1863, amid wave after wave of Confederate troops, the 20th Maine, under Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, stood alone. Astronomically outnumbered, his thin blue line stood among the trees and boulders of the rocky heights of Little Round Top, stubbornly holding its ground to the last. When the ammunition expired, Chamberlain, in a show of brilliance, ordered his men to fix bayonets and countercharge. The audacity of the maneuver disoriented the Confederates, who broke and retreated. The genius of Joshua Chamberlain and the grit and determination of the 20th Maine saved the Federal Army of the Potomac on the second day at Gettysburg. But this story is a modern invention, first introduced to popular culture in a magazine article in 1913, before mutating to become the bedrock of books, documentaries, and films. As Joshua Chamberlain has become synonymous with Gettysburg, the true history of the battle that scorching July day has been obscured. Without a doubt, the men of the 20th Maine fought bravely and redoubtably on the craggy slopes of Little Round Top. And without doubt, Chamberlain's unorthodox bayonet charge was an act of ingenuity and heroism. But for over a century, far too much attention has been paid to Chamberlain and his regiment. They did not, as some historians have claimed, stand alone on Little Round Top. They did not single-handedly win the battle for the Federal left. And above all else, they have taken far too much attention away from the other men of the brigade who held the same line, and from the man without whom none of them would have stood to defend the hill. Nearly 30 years after the guns fell silent in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in the fall of 1889, the society column of the Pittsburgh Dispatch carried for its readers the revelation that a prominent widow was staying at the Hotel Duquesne on her way home from the battlefield. Her late husband was immortalized in the public consciousness as heroic, gallant, and brave by newspaper articles and columns, which were still fixated on the 3-day battle at Gettysburg 26 years earlier, describing it with the zeal and fascination befitting the largest battle ever fought in the Americas. The spot where the man had fallen, mortally wounded, was a highlight of tours led by veteran, historian, and battlefield preservationist John Batchelder for luminaries and dignitaries, including President and First Lady Rutherford and Lucy Hayes. The man was the namesake of a Grand Army of the Republic post. Was the man the first monument on the battlefield outside of the National Cemetery had been placed for, and now stood in bronze atop a magnificent granite monument on the slopes of the rocky hill which he had given his life to defend. Yet, over 130 years after the Pittsburgh Dispatch informed its readers that Mrs. Strong Vincent was staying at the Hotel Duquesne, the name of her husband has been nearly lost to history. Brigadier General Strong Vincent commanded the 3rd Brigade, 1st Division, 5th Army Corps on July 2, 1863, when it climbed the rocky slopes of the hill today known as Little Round Top to prevent the envelopment of the Federal left flank and to protect the integrity of the famous fishhook line employed by Major General George Meade throughout the battle. Yet his reputation and his legacy have been diminished, especially over the past century, to benefit his subordinate, then Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Over the past 50 years, Chamberlain's supremacy has exploded to nigh unassailable heights, his popularity booming from Michael Shera's 1974 novel, The Killer Angels, Ken Burns' 1990 documentary series, The Civil War, and Ted Turner and Ronald Maxwell's 1993 film, Gettysburg. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain has become the almost uncontested hero of not just Gettysburg, but the American Civil War. His mustachioed stare looks out at us from dozens upon dozens of book covers, scores of heroic paintings, and from products ranging from coffee mugs to beers, throw pillows to pins, note cards to T-shirts. What caused the subordinate to eclipse the commander? while the easy answer to this question is that Vincent died and Chamberlain lived. There is more to it than that. Though it is relevant to keep in mind that the historical record of Chamberlain's service, particularly at Gettysburg, is worthy of closer scrutiny by the larger historical community. The following is not an examination of Chamberlain's post-war self-promotion, which is discussed at further length in the appendix. Instead, working with the assumption that Joshua Chamberlain does not deserve the full credit for the defense of Little Round Top, the following seeks to answer the question of just who the man was who ordered Chamberlain to hold his ground at all hazards on that July afternoon in 1863. While there is a mountain of literature on Chamberlain, including numerous published collections of his letters, uncounted biographies, and published memoirs, there is comparatively little on Strong Vincent. One relatively recent self-published biography of Vincent has been out of print since its initial run in 1997, and a short pamphlet-form biography was prepared for the dedication of a monument to Vincent in his hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania, during the city's bicentennial. Beyond these two works, no historian has attempted to examine the life of the 26-year-old man who has been relegated to a supporting role in the story of Gettysburg. But often in volumes about the American Civil War, or even more specifically about the Battle of Gettysburg, Strong Vincent is simply absent. When he does appear, it is usually only a brief mention in the familiar story of Chamberlain and the 20th Maine. He then vanishes back into the ether that has concealed him from modern eyes. Who was Strong Vincent? This project began, in some ways, during my visit to Gettysburg in May 2013, just prior to the sesquicentennial of the battle. As I stood on the crest of Little Round Top, I wondered just who the man who ordered Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine to hold the left end of the Federal line really was. The more I researched, the more letters and articles, papers and reports that I read, the more I realized that Strong Vincent is far more important than a bit player in the life of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. This privileged, educated young officer was a prism through which the American Civil War could be viewed with regards to a personal story of duty, patriotism, and sacrifice. In this book, evidence will be presented that, despite his privileged background, Vincent consistently chose to act against his personal best interests in order to support the war aims of the federal government throughout his service in the American Civil War, something that cannot be said for Joshua Chamberlain. Following a detailed examination of the sources, it appears to me to be without question that Brigadier General Strong Vincent has been critically discounted and undersold by generations of historians. Vincent was a more dynamic and arguably a more important figure for historians than Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He demonstrates the ideals of patriotic service to his nation without the attendant grumbling and self-importance of men such as Chamberlain, who once complained that commanding a brigade without the extra pay and allowances of a general's star was an injustice that quite canceled the compliment of having been given responsibility for the brigade. Vincent, more than anyone else, was responsible for the preservation of the Federal left flank at Gettysburg. His military record and service illustrate his devotion to cause and comrades far above and beyond the call of duty. A man who believed wholly and utterly in the cause in which he was engaged. A man who deserves far greater credit than he has received for the defense of Little Round Top on July 2, 1863. His death on the battlefield should have made him a martyr to his country, with a name as easily recalled as that of John Reynolds or Elmer Ellsworth. Instead, his story has been largely forgotten, even in his own hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania, where his only memorials are a school that has borne his name since 1930 and a statue that is quite literally overshadowed by other monuments on the city's bayfront. Having been forgotten and neglected for far too long, it is time for Vincent to take his place in the history of the Civil War, and especially its most famous battle. In this book, I have reconstructed the life of Brigadier General Strong Vincent and placed him back into the context of the American Civil War. Using the 83rd Pennsylvania, his regiment, as a proxy where issues of uncertainty regarding Vincent's actions and exploits arise, and pulling back for, at times, broader perspectives on where the war is at certain moments in order to provide context are, I hope, crutches that the listener will allow me. Chapter 1. The Strongs and the Vincents. Early Life, Education, and Courtship. Ho, the car Emancipation rides majestic through our nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty, a nation's glory. Roll it along through the nation, freedom's car, Emancipation. Get off the track, a song for emancipation. Jesse Hutchinson, 1844. The name Strong Vincent was arrived at by the baby's parents as a means to join together the surnames of their families, two of the most prominent and influential families in northern Pennsylvania, with lineage stretching back far into the 17th century colonial period. It could be argued that Strong Vincent's ancestors were representative of the genesis of the United States, and that the zeal with which he would fight for the twin causes of union and liberty stemmed from his ancestry, a family heritage of religious tolerance, moral rectitude, the importance of education, and the traditional Protestant work ethic that so typified the stereotypical Yankee of the early republic. His parental ancestors, then with the name Van Sant, had come to what is today the United States as French Huguenots, fleeing religious persecution following the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. This matrilineal stock was in the North American colonies before the arrival of the Van Sants in 1685. Elder John Strong arrived in the colony of Plymouth, not yet a part of Massachusetts Bay, in 1635, before settling in the colony of Connecticut. There, he served as supervisor of East Windsor for some years before retiring to Northampton, Massachusetts, before his death. By the time that Bethuel Boyd Vincent married Sarah Ann Strong on June 24, 1834, their families had both become among the most prominent and prosperous in northwestern Pennsylvania. Bethuel Boyd Vincent was the son of a respected and admired local judge, John P. Vincent, and earned his fortune in careers as surveyor, civil engineer, and merchant throughout northwest Pennsylvania. Around the time of his marriage, Bethuel Vincent was a partner in an iron forging firm and machine shop, Vincent, Himrod and Company, and shortly thereafter in a banking house, Vincent, Bailey and Company. When his son was born, Bethuel was serving as the treasurer and clerk of the newly incorporated borough of Waterford, Pennsylvania. Bethuel's bride, Sarah Ann Strong, was renowned for her beauty. Local lore and family tradition holds that the Marquis de Lafayette, on his tour of the United States in 1825, was so moved by her beauty that he dismounted his horse at her father's toll gate and crossed the farmyard in order to kiss her cheek. Her father, Captain Martin Strong, had been among the first settlers of Erie when he arrived and staked out a claim in July 1795. He eventually owned 800 acres, operated a tavern, inn, and toll gate, and financed the construction of the first Presbyterian church in Erie County from his own pocket for $800. With the marriage of Bethuel and Sarah in 1834, two of the most prominent families in Erie County were joined, and the birth of their first son on June 17, 1837, saw them honor their heritage by naming the boy Strong for his mother's family. Strong Vincent was born in the house of Judge Vincent, his paternal grandfather, at the corner of First and Cherry Streets in Waterford, just down the street from his parents' home at the corner of First and High Streets. Waterford, the former site of the French fort de la Rivière-à-Boeuf, frequently shortened to Fort Le Boeuf, where George Washington had once arrived with orders from the governor of the colony of Virginia to request the French leave Virginia's lands, thus precipitating the French and Indian 7 Years' War, was the center of Bethuel Vincent's commercial activities at the time of the birth of his first son. The household into which Strong Vincent was born was one that, if not embodying liberal ideals of equality, was closely affiliated with them through Bethuel's business partner, William Himrod. Vincent and Himrod had been friends and business partners for some years, and while Bethuel Vincent's views on slavery are not clearly known beyond his membership in the Republican Party, he acted as a Pennsylvania delegate to its 1860 nominating convention. William Himrod was a vocal and strident abolitionist. Himrod was a founding member of the first Anti-Slavery Society in Erie County in 1836. He was known locally to be a conductor on the Underground Railroad, arranging for the passage of escaped slaves across Lake Erie and into the Canadian Territory that today is the province of Ontario. In 1828 and 1829, Himrod had purchased a wide expanse of land bounded by Sassafras, Cherry, and 6th Streets on Erie's west side, right up to the bluffs overlooking the city's Presque Isle Bay. Christening the neighborhood New Jerusalem, Himrod made the lots available to African Americans, poor whites, and Jews at steeply discounted prices. He founded and endowed the French Street School for Colored Children and the Himrod Mission, the first educational institutions to cater to African Americans in Erie County, in 1824 and 1839, respectively. One can only speculate the influence played by William Himrod's vocal and quite public abolitionism in the formation of the character of his business partner's son, Strong. Bethuel Vincent moved his family from Waterford to Erie, Pennsylvania, in April 1843, to be closer to the forge that he operated with Himrod. At this time, the Vincent family had grown to include 3 children, Strong and his sisters Blanche and Belle. They all moved into Captain Martin Strong's 2-story frame townhouse on the northeast corner of State and 11th Streets in Erie, just down the block from the foundry, located on State Street between 11th and 12th. Vincent, Himrod and Company was among the first forging firms in western Pennsylvania to operate a blast furnace, and the firm quickly established other satellite foundries and operations around the region. Their clay furnace, named for Henry Clay, was the first in western Pennsylvania to be fueled by bituminous coke, and helped to spawn the town of Hermitage in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. Their Sharpsville furnace helped establish the town of Sharpsville, also in Mercer County. The Presque Isle factory and an iron ore mining and processing facility on Presque Isle led to expanded industrial development in Erie itself. Young Strong, shortly after turning 6 in the summer of 1843, was enrolled at the Erie Academy and began instruction in the typical collegiate pre-preparatory educational curriculum of the mid-19th century, reading, writing, and arithmetic, growing to include the classics, Latin, Greek, and philosophy as he grew older. Writing many years later, the family's second son, Boyd, would recall his childhood at the house on State and 11th Streets, where he was born in 1845, as consisting of Bible reading, family prayer, study of Sunday school lessons, strict Sunday observance, carefully regulated amusements. In spite of the wealth and largesse of the family provided by Vincent, Himrod and Company's success, the children were not allowed to grow indolent or lazy. Each boy had to take his share, too, of the daily chores about the house, caring for the horses and cows, building fires, carrying coal and ashes, and blackening all the shoes every Saturday night. Indeed, Boyd recalled his father's frequent exhortations that there were to be no lazy boys about me. Don't stand back and wait for the other fellow. Jump in and put your own hand to it. Bethuel Vincent was a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?